Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Prof. Murni Mahmud, PhD, our team leader in this inovasi pembelajaran digital program, and also Mem Amabur Hamzah, SPD MPD, who is our team teaching, one of the member of Discourse Analysis team teaching, and also the Honorable Dr. Michelle Zapovinia, our guest lecturer for Digital Learning Innovation Program for Discourse Analysis course. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has blessed us with healthy, safety, and protection so that we can gather in this virtual classroom for our program, Inovasi Pembelajaran Digital. Salawat and salam may always be poured to our great Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who brings us and becomes alive for all noble deeds. Alhamdulillah, today joining us in this virtual class, Dr. Michelle Zapovinia. She is our guest lecturer in Digital Learning Innovation Program for Discourse Analysis course, Literature Study Program, Faculty of Language and Literature, Universitas Negeri Makassar. And of course, also students from our partners from Yayasan Pendidikan Ujung Pandang, YPUP, Universitas Islam Makassar, and Universitas Mega Reski. Okay, for our first agenda for today is the opening and also a brief some brief report about our course, Discourse Analysis, from our team leader, Professor Murni Mahmud, PhD. The time and the place I present to you.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, everyone. Yes, it's our pleasure today to be in this class. Here we have Dr. Michelle Sampavitna from New South Wales, Australia. That's really great pleasure to be in this class with you. Dr. Michelle Sampavitna. Sorry if I pronounced the name incorrectly. Yes, as informed by Ibu Rehana just now, that this class is one of the projects in digital learning innovation and English literature program in which I had there. For the study program is under the project of digital learning innovation, and then discourse analysis becomes the subject that is project under digital learning digital learning innovation. Yeah. So here the students are all of them who program discourse analysis. Mostly they are from Universitas Negeri Makassar, and there are also some of them from MBKM, yeah, because in UNM we also have the program MBKM, Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka, and then some of the students from other universities in Indonesia can enroll the subject, and then discourse analysis is one of the subjects that that is enrolled by the students of MBKM. Yeah, yeah, I think we can start now. We are very happy. We can't wait anymore to listen to the lecture from Dr. Michelle Sampavitna for sharing her idea about discourse analysis. And then I'd like to inform to all of the students, because in discourse analysis, I think social media is one of the interesting topics in this in today's society, and I think we are very happy to have the lecture of Dr. Michelle Sampavitna. Yeah. Okay. So I officially open this course, and then I'll be give the time back to Ibu Rehana. Please, Ibu Rehana.
Thank you very much, Prof, for opening our agenda for today. And then the next, before giving the time to Dr. Michelle Zapafinia, I will read some brief information about her. So Dr. Michelle Zapafinia is an Australian linguist. She is an associate professor at University of New South Wales, Sydney. Her major contributions are based on the discourse of social media and ambient affiliation. It's about how people bond online. Her work is interdisciplinary and covers studies in systemic functional linguistics, SFL, corpus linguistics, multimodality, social media, online discourse, and social semiotics. Dr. Zapafinia is the author of 6 books and numerous journal articles covering these disciplines. She also said that her primary focus is on exploring the discourse of social media in terms of linguistic, paralinguistic, and multimodal patterns. Essentially, she is interested in ambient affiliation, which is how people bond online. And some of her research has been published in her book, Discourse of Twitter and Social Media, and Searchable Talk, Hashtags, and Social Media Meta Discourse. The other reason of her work includes discourse and diversionary justice. So I give the time and the opportunity for Dr. Michelle Zapafinia to give her a brief information on her educational background and also teaching experience at the University of New South Wales. And we are very excited that she's going to be our guest lecturer for this program. The time is yours, Dr. Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to come and meet you all. It's very nice to see such a lovely group of students. And I'm looking forward to giving a guest lecture later in the session. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my academic background to start. So my background is interdisciplinary, so it's both in linguistics and in informatics. So I originally did my PhD, I think it was about 15 years ago now, time flies, actually in a computer science department at the University of Sydney, where I was using systemic functional linguistics. So that's the model of language that I generally work with. I was using that model of language to look at the discourse of information technology professionals, specifically at their tacit knowledge. So tacit knowledge are things like, say, riding a bike that you know how to do, but you don't necessarily consciously realize how you do it. So I was looking at how IT people design software and platforms and applications, and looking at their tacit knowledge that was revealed through their grammatical patterns. So things that they're weren't necessarily aware about, but the way they spoke about what they do, what they did. So that was the focus of my PhD, and that was quite a while ago now. Since then, I did my postdoctoral research with Professor Jim Martin at Sydney University, so moving across from the science faculty over into the arts faculty. For that postdoc, I was working on a really interesting area of what's known as restorative justice. So that's a form of justice that seeks to move young people who have committed offences out of the criminal legal system into a process that is better suited to them. That process was known as youth justice conferencing, which basically is a circle of people, so police, youth liaison officers, and other community members that come together to try and help the young person that has committed an offence. So we were looking at both the language and the gesture and the spatial orientation of the room, etc. All of these semiotic resources, so all of these meaning-making resources, how they are involved in the process of youth justice conferencing. And then after that project, I moved across to the University of New South Wales, where I currently work. So I'm actually in the department of the School of Arts and Media. So it's a media department focused on communication and media studies. And that's when I started working on social media. So that's the connection with media. So using linguistics, generally systemic functional linguistics, to look at social media discourse. So that's my current area of research. So I'm using both linguistic theory and applying that to social media discourse analysis, and also more broadly what's known as social semiotics. So taking a multimodal approach to looking at things like social media images, so photography, also again looking at gesture in YouTube videos, looking at all kinds of paralanguage, so for example emoji. So yeah, I would term my current field of research digital discourse analysis. Some people call it computer mediated communication is another term that's used. So heavily focused on social media and applying a social semiotic perspective. So my main area of interest is what I term ambient affiliation. So affiliation is how people interact with each other and create social ties or social bonds or interpersonal meaning to enact relationships, so to have a sense of togetherness. But it also incorporates, you know, when you're coming together with someone, you might also be moving apart from someone. So it also incorporates discourse that is combative, as well as you know, coming together. So conflict as well as affiliation, and you see both extremes on social media. In looking at affiliation, I'm specifically interested in how language creates affiliation. So how people construe social bonds in discourse through their evaluative language in particular. And so the particular framework that I work with, and I'm not sure whether you've already come across it in your studies, is known as the appraisal framework. So it is a framework for looking at how evaluative language functions, looking in particular at how attitude is construed in language, emotions and opinions are construed in language, how language is used to refer to other positions or textual voices, and then how attitudes are scaled up and down. So that's the three main areas of appraisal theory. In terms of multimodality, I also have a particular interest in what I call social photography, so social media images, and have been working for the last 5 years with Dr. Sumin Zhao at the University of Edinburgh. We have a project looking at selfies, looking at how different kinds of visual intersubjectivity work in images, so through the visual structure of selfies. So not only looking at selfies where it's someone's face, that's a classic selfie that we all know, but the ones that you'll sometimes see on Instagram, you know, where someone has their hand around a coffee cup and you see part of the photographer's body, or ones where you know that the photographer is there because of the position of objects in the image, suggesting, perhaps a plate with the knife and fork, suggesting that the photographer is just outside the visual frame. So we were looking at those visual structures and how they function and what they mean. Excuse me. I also work on social tagging, so specifically hashtags. So recently wrote a book on hashtags, looking at meta discourse on social media, so how people construe evaluative meta commentary in hashtags. So hashtags can mark the topic of, say, a tweet, but they also can do interpersonal work. So making comment on the rest of the tweet. And my most current project that I'm currently working on with a colleague is looking at emoji using systemic functional linguistics to look at how emoji and language interact with each other in digital messages and in social media messages. And at the moment, I'm writing a book on emoji and social media paralanguages for Cambridge University Press, which will hopefully come out in the next year or so. What else? In terms of my teaching at UNSW, I teach 2 courses in the media program. The first course is known as Mobile Cultures, where we explore the design and use of mobile apps as semiotic technologies. And we use a particular method called the app walkthrough method to explore the technical and semiotic resources of apps. So students will pick an app that they're interested in, and I'll use this method to explore what the app looks like, what kinds of resources, visual and linguistic, are used in the app, what people can do with the app, all kinds of stuff like that. And the other course that I teach is social media, which essentially is covering different types of social media, how people communicate with social media, what kinds of patterns can we notice, and also how people bond with social media is another topic that we cover. So I think that's given you an overview of my background, what I do and what I'm currently teaching. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing a guest lecture for you later in your session. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zapapinho, for your introduction to what you're going to elaborate later on your lecture. The research topics and projects of Dr. Zapapinho is going to be very valuable resource for our course this semester, as mainly our discussion and interpretation in discourse analysis will be extracted from social media. And also it will add new materials and first perspectives on our course. So we cannot wait for your lecture and recorded video. This will be very interesting and very exciting for us in this discourse analysis course. Okay, so I will give opportunities for our students to give questions. If you have any questions for Dr. Zapapinho, it would be great. She's going to record her video lecture later, and as one of our topics in the discourse analysis course. Is there any question?
Yes, students, all of you students. Now we can have questions to Dr. Mitchell. I think Dr. Mitchell is very happy to answer the questions. We really want to share many things about how to do discourse in relation to the social media. Yeah, silakan. For those of you who maybe feel very shy to ask questions, you can use the chat here. Yeah, you may write down your question here in the chats, and also you can raise hand. Ayo dong, masa sih malu-malu? Silakan. Ya, silakan Nur Patra. I think Nur Patra is going to ask questions. Silakan Nur Patra. Ya, di-mute dulu Adek. Yes, you can unmute.
I have a question for the students.
Yeah. Yes, we are
Yeah.
waiting for the questions from the students. Please, students, here we have 75 participants. Yeah, please.
Maybe I can ask them what areas do they work on?
Yeah,
what
sure,
background do
sure.
students have? Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yes, sure. Yes, yes. The area, yeah. So I think we really want to know the area in which the students are interested in it. Yeah, maybe students, you may share your idea about what you have in your mind about how to do discourse analysis, and maybe the area that that may be interested, that become interesting for you. As I explained in the video, there is a kind of discipline in discourse analysis, and then there are many kinds of areas in which we can do discourse analysis. And I think social media mediated communication is one of the interesting area at the moment. I myself, Dr. Michelle, also try to do discourse analysis in WhatsApp chat and also in the Instagram. Yeah, analyze some of the posts from the Instagrams and then bring to the analysis. And then it is quite interesting because now social media is so popular, and then there are many things happening there. And then I think that is really worth of exploration for that. Yeah, so students, you can share your idea about that. Now here we have a very important guest lecturer from Australia, and I think this is a good chance for you to share your idea, to share your apa namanya? Ya, silakan ini. Ya. Please.
Okay, ma'am,
Okay.
I have a
Please,
question.
Nur Fatra.
Okay. My name is Nur Fatra, and then I'm from the English literature. How are social action accomplished in discourse? That's my question, ma'am.
Mhm.
How are social action accomplished in discourse?
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so
Excuse me, Dr. Zapavinia, can you please add your speaker because it's not really
can you hear
clear.
me? Can
Can
you
you
hear
add
me
the
now?
volume of your speaker, mic?
Let's see if I can turn it up any higher. I think it's at the maximum audio. Let's see.
Oh yeah, okay. That's all right.
Is that okay now? Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting question. How do things that are in the social world, actions, behaviors, etc., how do they get into language? You know, and so the theory of language that I work with, systemic functional linguistics, theorizes that a relationship between context and language. So our social relations and contexts are realized, they use the word realized in language. And so we can look at patterns in people's discourse to theoretically understand broader social patterns. So when I'm looking at affiliation, for example, I'm interested in, at the social level, social bonds, and at the discursive level, how they actually happen when people interact with language. So yeah, it's a really interesting theoretical and practical question. How do you create connections between what is social and what is linguistic? And it really depends on the theory that you're working with and how it conceives of those relationships. So within the kind of theory that I'm working with, we're saying that there's a realization relationship between the social and the linguistic. Does that answer your question?
Nur Patra.
Yes, I got it. Thanks for the experience.
Thank you.
All right.
Also, Dr. Zapavinia, our students for this course, this discourse analysis, this is their first time, they have to, they will deal with appraisal and other models of evaluative language. So this is their first experience of this kind of discussion and topics.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one of the interesting things, excuse me, about appraisal is that it makes a distinction between emotion. Sorry, I'm going to have a little bit of water. It makes a distinction between emotion and opinion, which is important, and some theories of sentiment don't do that. So the difference between saying that you love doing something as opposed to, oh, that's an interesting book. So one's about your personal emotion as a sensor, emoting, and the other is an opinion about an object. So that's one of the main kind of distinctions in appraisal that sort of sets it apart from some other theories where they're more affect based. Yeah, but so if students haven't seen appraisal before, in my lecture I'll start from the basics and then build up from the systems to then looking at how they're used to look at social media discourse. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yes, I also have a question. Yeah, like this, I currently do kind of research in politeness and impoliteness in social media, and then I usually use the theory of Brown and Levinson, but that's already in 1987. And then my mind is that, oh, whether I still need to stick on the theory of Brown and Levinson, should I also take other kinds of theories, and then by looking at the text, and then I try to formulate some of the ideas there about politeness and impoliteness in social media. And also, I'm wondering about when should I use the experience, yeah, and or maybe the background of the theories in order to give such kinds of analysis in the deep analysis for the text. Yeah, should I just base on the theory only, or could I say, for example, mix from the experience? Yes, things like what Burian just asked now, whether we have to differentiate between emotion and also our opinion. Yeah, what do you think about that? I'm to listen to that.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about social media research is that there are a lot of people from different areas of linguistics working on what is, you know, a new and interesting kind of phenomena, and so they bring different perspectives. So yeah, I found that at least within systemic functional linguistics, one of the most useful lenses is looking at the interpersonal meaning. So how people enact relationships with language. And I found that that actually, that kind of lens has connections with other theories as well. So, you know, sociolinguists and people working in pragmatics. So I've published some of my research in pragmatics journals. And yeah, pragmatics has that deep interest, a long history at looking at politeness and face. And I think, yeah, I think that you can mix together different methods and perspectives when working on social media discourse. Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, students, questions, students? Silakan, please.
Which degree are most of your students working towards?
This is first degree, yeah, first degree undergraduate. We call it S1, S1 program. Yes, because we have a master degree and also doctorate degree, and this is undergraduate. Yes. Well, okay. I think Rizal Alamsa is raising hand. Silakan Rizal. Rizal, time is yours. Ada yang raise hand. Someone raise hand. Please, Rizal.
I think he's muted.
Yes, still.
Oh, he said that he can't turn on his microphone. He said in the chat. Maybe he can ask the question in the chat.
Yes, please. You have a question? Also other students can also write down the questions in the column of chat here. Bisa di kolom chat di sini. You can also write down your questions here in the chat. Yeah. I think Rizal Alamsa, you raised your hand and I already asked to unmute. What's the problem with that? Ya.
Rizal bisa ditulis di chat saja, Rizal.
Dia tidak bisa. Ya, anyone else? Anyone else?
Me, Prof.
Who is siapa tadi?
Irma Harmin, Prof.
Irma Harmin. Yes, please. Irma Harmin. Please.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My question is, I wonder how a polyglot learn their languages, how they make fluent in their each of the language that they learn, or I think that's all.
Yes.
So you were asking about, sorry, I missed the first part of the question. People that speak multiple languages?
The polyglot, the one who speak multiple languages. How do they maintain to learn the language, and are they really fluent in the language that they learn? Is it clear?
It's interesting. Yeah, a lot of social media research tends to be focused on English, which is not good because obviously social media environments are multilingual. And so, yeah, it's important. It's an important area that needs to be developed where people are looking at multiple languages. In terms of people using social media who speak multiple languages, yeah, I'm not sure. It's not an area of research that I've worked on, but I imagine that being able to access different streams of content in different languages would be really good if you're trying to maintain multiple languages and proficiency in multiple languages. Yeah, definitely. What's your experience? Do you find social media useful for that, for keeping up with different languages?
Yes, I do find social media has a big influence for that, because many people another platform like Ome TV, like where they are come from people Omegle from all over the world speaking their languages, but yeah, mostly they use English.
That's quite interesting to see perhaps what kinds of linguistic practices emerge with social media, where people switch between different languages just in the one message. That's interesting too. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Silakan. Yes, please.
Okay, Dr. Zapapinya, I have also a question for you. This is your you have this research about social media, especially in Twitter and hashtags. Why do you use the platform Twitter, and what makes it more interesting than the other social media platform?
Yeah, I started off looking at Twitter because it was a very interesting data source. So I started working on Twitter in about, I think, 2008. And so it was possible to collect really large volumes of language, of naturally occurring language, and then do corpus-based analysis. So corpus-based analysis is discourse analysis that is informed by the kinds of patterns that you can search for in a corpus, as opposed to corpus-driven analysis, which is purely just on this, based on the statistics and word frequency lists. So corpus-based discourse analysis is a little bit more mixed methods, so incorporating both, you know, statistical dimensions, but also qualitative analysis, detailed qualitative analysis of concordance lines, so instances of the data. So yeah, I started off with Twitter just for that practical reason, that it was possible to collect huge amounts of data, and it was quite interesting to explore. And it was interesting for me personally to see these kinds of mass sort of social bonding that would happen where people use hashtags or engage in kind of memes, making memes, etc., where people were creating these kinds of social alignments, but they weren't necessarily always talking to each other back and forth. I mean, obviously you can do that as well, but there's also this kind of more larger scale kind of bonding that I was interested in. And it seems kind of counterintuitive that people would be kind of communing or creating a sense of togetherness, but not really interacting. So that's what I found fascinating about that kind of data. And then as social media progressed, then I shifted more to incorporating multimodal analysis. So kind of trying to factor in, how do we look at images, and then also working on YouTube data, where you can't just look at the written transcript, you've got to consider all of the dimensions that are in play in when people are making meaning. So what I'm doing now, a lot of gesturing, you got to, how do we, and I've just, I have a book coming out sometime this year with Jim Martin and some other colleagues from the University of Sydney, looking at paralanguage, so a social semiotic model for analysing paralanguage, and so I use that framework to look at gesture, and more recently also looking at kinds of interesting novel social practices that you see on YouTube, and I think there's one of them that I'm going to select as the data set for the lecture that I'll give later in the session, and I'm hoping that people have seen this before. Have you ever heard of ASMR? Does anyone know that? Yeah, where people are.
Isn't that from YouTube, right?
Yeah, where people
Yeah.
do that whispering and yeah. So I've done some research looking at ASMR videos, and I'm not going to look at the video. I'm going to instead look at the comment stream under ASMR videos and see, because there's a nice kind of data set for examples of appraisal and what are people bonding about. So there's a lot of talk about aesthetic appreciations of the sound that people are making. It's a whole kind of community of people. So it's quite, I think it'll make a fairly interesting case study. Hopefully. So if the students don't know what ASMR is, maybe they could look it up beforehand so that they know what I'm talking about. But I imagine that it's probably they know more about it than I do, being a younger demographic.
So I like to watch SMR video, but I've never looked up the commentary though.
Yeah,
That will be very interesting.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great for research topic. Okay, so next we have a question in the chat room, and this is from Rizal. So he did my mini research. I did my mini research about anthropological linguistics last year. So I wonder, is it possible to do the discourse analysis in anthropological linguistics?
Yeah, that I imagine it is. It's a different subfield of linguistics to the field that I work in. Although, in terms of looking at social media images, I've recently been working with a digital anthropologist, and it's very interesting to see the kinds of methods that anthropologists use when they come into contact with social media stuff. So that kind of immersion within the communities to see what's happening, doing interviews with people, watching what people do online. So yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely possible.
Okay, Rizal, that's the answer. So next, language, including discourse, is an activity and at the same time a two-way instrument between writers and readers. And what does it mean? Explain the statement from Nurul Anugrah.
Okay, so in terms of the theory that I work with, it thinks about language in three ways. So having three main functions: an experiential function of kind of construing experience. So you can think about that loosely as the topic or the theme that's happening. An interpersonal function of enacting relationships. So that's, I think, so the relationship between the writer and the reader is managed through that kind of interpersonal meaning, which evaluative language plays an important role. And then the third type of meaning is textual meaning. So how do we recognize something as a text? Well, we recognize it because it's got some kind of coherence. It's structured in a certain way. We can because we're socialized into a particular community, we can recognize, okay, yes, that's a tweet, or that's a letter, or that's, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I would say I think that those three lenses on any active meaning can illuminate important dimensions. So hopefully that answers the question of how language can be about activities, also about relationships between writers and readers, if I'm interpreting the question correctly.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have another question.
I also have.
Patra,
Can I have one question?
okay.
Yes. Yeah. Um, in social media, sometimes we cannot differentiate which one is the real post. Sometimes it's only just like pretending, and yeah, it's just kind to show off. And then I'd like to analyze some of those posts, and I think I need to base my analysis on the reality, on the facts. So how could I select those? Thank you.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
So do you mean posts that are misinformation?
Yes,
Deceptive?
yeah. Sometimes like they are posting using English, but they are just trying to not only use the good English, but when I confirm, say for example, yes, it's just a kind of style, something like that, and then we don't know really exactly whether this is a real post or only just trying to show off, or maybe just as entertainment. While I myself, I'd like to take the text in order to show that, oh, come on, this is the reality in our society. So is there any kinds of ways for me to select those kinds of posts? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I think there's a few different types of communication involved there. On the one hand, on the most extreme end, you have misinformation or disinformation. So I have a PhD student working on looking at misinformation in YouTube videos. So for example, you might remember the Notre Dame fire. Was that 2 years ago now? It's hard to know where we are now. I think it was a couple of years ago. Looking at misinformation and videos that were posted about that. So on one hand, you have complete disinformation, and then I guess you have different kinds of propaganda. You have people exaggerating. There are all kinds of different, I mean, pretty much any kind of communication you can think of, you can find examples of on social media. So I guess the challenge then when collecting data is to pick out key patterns that you think characterize the kind of communication that you're wanting to sample. So that's, so in corpus linguistics, which is the other area of linguistics that I work in, that's known as the selection criteria. And your corpus, like your data set, is only as good as that selection criteria. So yeah, it's really challenging if you've got, so it sounds like, yeah, if you're interested in the representation of facts or reality, then, but you're seeing some kind of other communication about a certain topic that's kind of, I don't know, exaggerating or misrepresenting something,
Yes.
then yeah, it's quite difficult to create ways of collecting that, because often in the case of, for example, misinformation, the aim is to look as similar as to real information.
Yeah.
So then how do you automatically pull out texts from a service like, say, Twitter? Also find with data such as Twitter, it's getting really, really noisy now. Like it's quite different to how it was when I first started working on Twitter. So now when I create a corpus, I'm often finding that, yes, I can automatically remove things like repeated posts, retweets if I'm not interested in looking at retweets. But if I want to get rid of all the marketing or advertising discourse or discourse produced by bots, for instance, it's actually quite difficult to do that in any kind of automatic way. So if you're working with millions of posts, you don't want to be there manually like deleting all the ones you don't want. But I'm finding that, yeah, it's quite noisy in that sense of there is a lot of, for example, working on a project at the moment, looking at how people talk about working from home. So what we're all doing now in front of Zoom. And I was wanting to collect some tweets about working from home. And so using that hashtag working from home or WFH, and just finding that there's, yeah, it's really hard to isolate the part of the discourse that is people genuinely talking about their experience of working from home, as opposed to all of these marketers saying, you know, buy this, I'll pay you this much to work from home. That kind of discourse drowns out the actual discourse by actual people. So that's a massive challenge across social media, is to being able to isolate what you actually want to study in, given that now it's such a social media is such a corporate endeavor now, with so many people trying to use it to make money or just create spam. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the next question is from Sita Sukmaningsi. Is there any way to do discourse analysis besides on social media? And do you think the result would be very different than using social media?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, the tools that I use to do discourse analysis, the aim isn't just to make them work for social media, it's to make them work for all kinds of language. So yeah, I mean, and you can see that in the kinds of projects that I worked on. So I remember at the beginning I mentioned I'd worked on IT, people talking about building computer software. I've also worked on restorative justice and on social media. And so the theory of language that I'm working with aims to be able to account for all different kinds of social practices. But you find that when you go in to look at one niche area, so just say honing in and looking at social media, you'll find things for which your general theory doesn't work. So you'll find that the general theory of language perhaps that you're working with doesn't accurately illuminate some of the features, say for example hashtags, and the kind of strange meta discourse that you can do on Twitter that you can't do when you're speaking face to face. So it's actually quite productive, you'll find, in trying to account for this new stuff that we find in this new area of discourse. You then elaborate the theory and you expand the theory to account for that. And then it's kind of an iterative process. So as you go to look at new things, you expand the theory. But the theory also needs to be flexible enough to do that. I hope that made sense. Yeah, so I guess generally what I mean is that, yes, the tools of discourse analysis, so for example, appraisal, can be used across many different areas of social life, but you may find that you need to tweak them or change them slightly to make them work properly on the area that you're looking at.
Yes, thank you. And I think also the challenge would be one of the things that makes it interesting to be researched.
Yes.
Yes. So the next question is from Anur Patra. I have question is, how are ideologies constructed in discourse?
Yeah, that's an interesting and tricky problem. And it's something that systemic functional linguistics has had quite a focus on. So there are researchers looking at, for example, discourse about war and ideologies that are embedded in how we talk about war, and at the level of grammar, for instance. So you'll often notice in reportings of like horrific events that depending on who is writing the story, so which country or whose perspective, the agent will be different. So the person that, the agent in the clause that does the killing or the bombing, if you're looking to say from an American perspective, it won't be an American. Or if you're looking from a different country's perspective, how they choose to talk about things such as war or politics or things like that even at the level of grammar, so below discourse semantics, is quite fascinating. So I guess generally I would say that we can figure out patterns in ideology by looking at patterns in language. So taking appraisal as an example, what a certain ideological position you would expect would have a certain patterning of appraisal. So certain kinds of things would be valued and seen as important. Certain things would be targeted and positioned as being bad. So that, I think that's the link between ideology and discourse is that kind of patterning of, in particular, evaluative language is very illuminating. So yeah, that's an interesting question.
Thank you. Next question. I hope that if you have another question, Nur Patra, you can write down in the chat room. And then I would like to give the time for Setia Wardana. Setia Wardana, you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, good afternoon from Australia, Miss Michelle. It's nice to meet you. It's been an honor to me to ask a question. So for this discourse material, I think, in my opinion, I have read it so many articles about it, and then one in head speech is mostly the biggest thing in social media who can make us mentality is not good, exactly like that. In my opinion, what Miss Michelle think about someone who doesn't write his full name in social media, who always using hate speech, other is sexual orientation, sexual harassment, anything, etc. about that. What Miss Michelle think about it? Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, social media discourse is full of hate speech and sexist language and all kinds of bad stuff. Yeah, and it is interesting. So when I'm looking at affiliation, it's the flip side of it is disaffiliation. So as you're aligning with someone or something, you're often also disaligning from something else. So you see that in terms of research on face-to-face communication. One area of work where that's really obvious is research into gossip, where people are gossiping about someone and saying bad things about someone and negatively appraising someone. That actually is an act of affiliation. So by criticizing someone else, you're actually bonding with the person that you're talking to. So that's really interesting. So it's kind of similar thing on social media where people are criticizing something or directing hate speech at a certain community or identity or persona. They're doing that to align with something else, to create social alignments with some other community that they want to identify themselves with. So yeah, I think that it's always that interpersonal dimension that is really interesting in anything. So in hate speech, what's going on, it's also interesting to look at that from the perspective of ideology that we were just looking at. So what kind of ideological position are you trying to put forward by directing criticism at certain groups? There's a lot of that on social media, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Ada pertanyaan lanjutan? Bagaimana, Setia?
Yes, Miss. In my
Tolong bisa videonya diaktifkan, mau di capture.
Okay. Tidak ini, ma'am. My laptop is not compatible to using this virtual background. So yeah, like that. I just want one advice from Miss Michelle, because I want to make my own research about hate speech. Can I ask one thing to make my article or my research my research is good is what is the benefit or the risk of what I'm using to research this kind of hate speech theory. Thank you, Miss.
Sorry, I missed. So you want to research hate speech.
Yes.
What was your question? I didn't hear the.
I want to ask about Miss Michelle advice about what the risk and benefit when I
risk and benefit,
when I research this kind of theory about hate speech. Thank you, Miss.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like there are a lot of ethical issues to think about when researching hate speech. One interesting dimension of that is if you're researching forms of communication that someone probably might not necessarily how can I put this? If someone's putting out material online that is negative, that is that we might say is socially sanctioned, that in research, you often try to get informed consent from your participants if you're doing up close research of people's language. But if you've got someone, presenting misinformation or hate speech or stuff like that online, how do you get consent from them? Because it's not obviously something that they wouldn't necessarily want people to associate with their identity, depending on who they are and what kind of group they're involved in. So yeah, that is a factor to consider in your research design, and it might be worth contacting people who have worked on the particular kind of hate speech that you're looking at and see what they've done in mitigating that risk. And also you would also need to account for the perspective of the victims of the hate speech, depending what the hate speech is about, and how you're representing them as well is an important thing to think about, and how you can do that in an ethical way, so that you're not basically you're trying to avoid causing harm to any of your research participants. So you've got to think about, you have to kind of think through the ethical issues, because one resource that is useful is the ethical guidelines put out by the Association for Internet Researchers. So they update those. So they give you some kind of broad guidelines about how to manage those kinds of risks. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Miss. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you, Satya. That's a really good discussion. I hope you can be successful with your research about that. Okay, next, Nurlaila Arianto.
Yeah,
Can unmute.
Assalamualaikum.
Okay.
First of all, so sorry for not using the background because I use the phone. So I would make my question short. Once I found an article that written about psychology and discourse analysis. Maybe I could ask about, is there any important connection about psychology and discourse analysis? And is there any advantage or the benefits of it using the psychological side in discourse analysis?
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, it really depends on your theory of language, how you think about psychology as it relates to language. So and a lot of that depends on how your theory considers the idea of intention in language. So in terms of systemic functional linguistics, the theory that I'm working with, it generally avoids thinking about intention and instead figures that as choice, linguistic choice, but choice is often an unconscious thing. So it's what people tend to do in certain social situations. But there are other theories of language that are more psychological. So there's a whole area of linguistics called cognitive linguistics, which is about very much focused on perception and how that relates to language. So that's a different field to my field, but I have found that work actually quite useful for different reasons. So if that's something that you're interested in, yeah, I would definitely look into cognitive linguistics and research in some of the cognitive linguistics journals.
Okay. For Laila. Okay, Nurlaila, is it?
Yeah, it's enough. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's great. Okay, next we have a question from Prof. Murni. Should we ask permission to use the post from social media from the owner of the account?
Yeah, that's another interesting ethical issue, which will depend on your university's ethics committee and what they require. So if you're working with a corpus that has 100 billion tweets in it, obviously it's impractical and you couldn't ask every single person for permission, but you can still think through some of the ethical issues. So thinking, is the kind of discourse that I'm looking at really sensitive discourse? Does it cover issues that might affect people in negative ways? And if that's the case, think of strategies that you can use to mitigate that and mitigate the risk of harm. You can think about things like partially anonymizing your data in different ways. So making sure that there's no real people's real names or real locations or things that could identify a single person is another important thing to do. If you're using, if you're doing a really detailed analysis of something that has a photograph in it, for instance, then again, you need to think about asking. And usually if you're doing that, you'll only have a small number of instances, just say in a research article. Then you would go and definitely would ask permission from that person and ask them, is it okay if we show your face, or do you want me to black it out with a shape to get or blur the face, or do you want me to use your real name, or do you want me to use your social media name, like your handle instead? Or yeah, and particularly if you're wanting to publish your work, journals and book publishers will require you to get permission for using any images from social media. So that was something that I came across when doing my research on selfies, that yeah, it was important to get permission. And so sometimes one of the ways you can kind of manage that in a practical sense is, you might be doing analysis on a data set of 1,000 images, but then in your work only showing a handful of images and getting permission from those. So those smaller set of images might be characteristic of the broader set, but it means that you only have to ask permission from a smaller number of people. That's something that I've done as well. But yeah, it's a bit of an ethical minefield.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Oke, kita kasih kesempatan dulu. Tadi ada Zulkarnain, sudah beberapa kali angkat tangan. Zulkarnain, in bad connection ya.
Oh, yeah.
Ada Zulkarnain?
Yeah, I will write my here. Here.
Oke, Zulkarnain, Zulhair ya. Zulhair, mungkin bisa matikan saja videonya. Nanti kita kembali sama Zulhair. Now we give the chance to Wirna Cahyani to raise hand now. Please ask your question.
Nowadays, people are comparing to build their personal branding on social media. And as we know that the number of
Wirna, tidak ada suaranya, Wirna. Wirna. Tidak ada suara Wirna. Oke. Mungkin kita bisa beralih. We are going to the chat room again while waiting for Wirna. Okay, now okay, Zulhair, how the discourse analysis work in abstract content, especially on social media? For example, there is the abstract feed on Instagram. How we use discourse analysis to know the real meaning of that content, because it makes misunderstanding and if still abstract content. So we can say this right here. Okay. What do you mean by abstract content? What do you mean by abstract content, Zulhair?
I mean, the abstract content is like if there's people or persons in social media, in Instagram or the content is didn't clear.
Can you please, Zulhair, can you hear it? Dr. Zapafinian?
No.
Okay, so Zulhair, can you just please type it down on the room chat? Okay, we move to Rizal's question. So we still have about 10 minutes, Dr. Zafafinia, and we still want to give the opportunities to the students for the questions. So nowadays, many companies doing advertisement in social media that probably influence people to buy their products. So I think ordinary people should learn about critical discourse analysis about advertisement in social media so that they are not be able to deceive by a responsible company. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of media literacy is really important, particularly for young people. Yeah, it's quite interesting the ways in which advertisers on social media kind of co-opt or pick up the kinds of language patterns and visual structures that everyday social media users employ and then use them to advertise things. So for example, we saw that with selfies. So you know how I mentioned that visual structure of, you know, the hand holding a coffee cup and there might be a nice view in the background. We've actually been looking at the Starbucks feed on Instagram, and it's really interesting to see that that visual structure happens over and over and over again to advertise coffee. So they're kind of using the kinds of structures that they see in everyday personal discourse to then sell you products and make it more to create greater involvement or to kind of align or bond with the customer in order to sell more things. So I think that, yeah, having an understanding of advertising discourse is really important for the general public. Yeah, and because often that advertising discourse is trying to look like everyday discourse, and Instagram is particularly good at it. Yeah, I've noticed that. I guess we all kind of think, oh, we're immune to advertising, but then Instagram is often recommending things that I want to buy, and I'm thinking, oh, gee, wow, it really does work. It really does. That kind of personalization where the algorithm that the social media platform uses picks up on what you like and what you talk about, and what you take photos of, and then uses that to sell you things. It's quite effective, which is not good for your wallet.
Yeah, that's very interesting because not only the students, the lecturers also struggling with that, because we like to shop from Instagram, especially.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so next question, and I also noticed that Dr. Zapapinya is also research about selfies, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Okay, because we only have about 5 minutes to go, I'm going to read the last question from Wirna Cahyani. Wirna and Winda, I think it's rather similar. Nowadays, people are competing to build their personal branding on social media, and we know that the number of followers on social media determines the acceptance of information conveyed to the public. I want to know your opinion about this. How big is influence of followers? And from Winda, how are identities negotiated in discourse?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that social, what we call the attention economy, in which social media influencers have a huge, have a huge degree of importance, is really something that has emerged over the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years, hasn't it? And yeah, it is very much tied with the kinds of algorithms that these platforms use. So what appears at the top of your YouTube feed when you search for a particular term, or what do you see on Twitter, or what do you see on Instagram, is both a product of those algorithms, and then also a product of those popular YouTubers or popular Instagrammers, who can be loosely termed influencers. And yeah, you don't necessarily, I mean, there are different kinds of practices that those influencers have. Sometimes they'll tell you, I'm advertising to you, and sometimes they won't tell you when they're being paid to endorse certain kinds of products. But it's an interesting kind of a different way in which I guess what media studies would call an opinion leader, how that is being integrated into the kind of media that we consume. So it's a slightly new way of doing that. And it kind of is related to the next question about how identities are negotiated in discourse. So these influencers will try and present themselves in a certain way with a certain identity. How do we analyze that? Again, I would come back to looking at what I've mentioned earlier about, you can find out a lot from looking at evaluative language. So what kinds of things do these influencers present as desirable, or things that we should aspire to? What kinds of values do they over and over and over again construe in their language? Gives you a sense of the kind of identity that they're trying to create. So I would say that generally speaking, identity is created in language through the patterns that the patterns of language, patterns of gesture, patterns of other kinds of choices that people employ on a regular basis. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for the questions and also the answers from Dr. Zapafinia. The question from Muhammad Zulhair is rather similar with Prof. Murni's question earlier. For example, there is a person upload content on social media, but the content didn't clear. Does it makes people misconception about that content? So how we use discourse analysis to know the real meaning of that content?
That's interesting, isn't it? Because discourse analysis can really only analyze what is available. So it looks at what patterns are available and what meanings are realized in the patterns that we can see. So it's it's a slightly different kind of research methodology to look at a text and then try and make inferences about the truth of that text. We can only really do that by adding in another method. So maybe a method from media studies or anthropology, where you go and interview people, or you do some kind of survey, or because you really as a discourse analyst, the data that you're working with is text, language, and you don't necessarily know what's inside a person's head unless you go and ask them about that text that they've made. So I don't think you can do it straight off the discourse, straight off the text. You can probably find clues in the text, but then you need to add something else in, so another research methodology to then go and find out about what that person really was doing. So you need extra data.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, the students, and also Dr. Zakovinya, for this very exciting discussion. And we are looking forward to the recorded lecture for our for the topic of ambient affiliation on evaluative language. Okay, so I think this is we come to the end of our meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance, for the students from Universitas Negeri Makassar, from YPUP, from Universitas Islam Makassar, from Universitas Mega Reski. Okay, so we are from the teaching team of discourse analysis and digital learning innovation project team. We express our gratitude for your attendance and for this first agenda of our for our course. And I hope that later all of the students can determine their research that is related to this discourse analysis, and there are so many interesting topics that came up today from after this discussion, and I hope there will be more later. We can have the correspondence via email, Dr. Zakovinya, about the recorded lecture, and also if the students have another questions for especially when it's related to their research, or they have the questions about our topics. So thank you very much for the attendance, and I hope you are all well and stay healthy in this very confusing moment, and in this pandemic era. And I think for the last time we would like to capture take the picture this for this class. Okay, so please if you can show your video, we want to take the picture from the first page. Okay, smile. Okay, next, page 2. Ma'am Ama, page 2 na yun. Okay, page 3, please smile. Okay, so I think that's all for today. Thank you very much. I hope that all of our meetings in this course and this program can be running well later. Thank you very much. I close this meeting. Prof. Murni.
Thank
Yes.
you very much. Thank you very much.
Meet you.
Really nice.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes,
Yes, and hopefully
Miss.
students can take a lot of benefit from it.
yes, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sarangnya.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and have a good day.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Thank you, ma'am.
wabarakatuh.
Prof.
Thank you, ma'am.